Hello and welcome to this talk at the Kahoot at Work Summit. I'm Sarah McElwee and I work in the Research and Thought Leadership team at Cambridge Assessment English, which is part of the University of Cambridge. We are experts in the teaching, assessment and learning of English. This evening I'm going to be talking about key research in adult learning that's relevant not just to language learning, but to learning in the workplace more generally. More than ever now, organisations are looking for ways to support their learners who are working remotely and learning online. So I hope that this talk will give you some evidence-based ideas to think about and some suggestions for how you might use Kahoots effectively in your own workplace. I wanted to begin by sharing this quote, which is about adult English language learners, just to remind us of the richness and complexity of adult learning. Adults bring this breadth of educational and personal experience to learning situations, but they might have very different approaches to how they learn. At Cambridge English, we know a lot about the motivations of adults who learn English, and this is reflected in research in the discipline of learning and development more broadly. So what do we know? Well, we know that adult learners usually have a goal in mind, and their learning is often connected to a personal purpose. That might be to further academic studies, to progress their careers, to more effectively for their own business. But learners need to see the application and purpose of what they are studying. And something as simple as developing their own learning objectives at the outset can really help with this. Research shows that adults want their workplace training to be relevant to their daily work lives and to be focused on completing specific tasks. They need to see a clear purpose for it. If a workplace training programme doesn't really seem to speak to an employee, if the point of it is unclear or it seems to benefit the organisation more than the learner, then we know that engagement will drop. As well as these clear social drives for learning, adults have the cognitive kit that really helps them to learn efficiently, although there might be some individual differences in this. By adulthood, working memory capacity is fully developed, and that's the ability to hold a piece of information in mind in order to do something purposeful with it, like problem solving. Adults are able to hypothesize about ideas and scenarios and to hold abstract and conceptual thoughts and to think about them. Most importantly, we also know that adults are able to reflect on their own thinking, sometimes independently, or sometimes they may need a prompt to support this, but it helps them to understand where they are in their particular learning process at any given time and to diagnose what will help them to improve. So what else do we know about adult learners? Well, I'd like to start with a story from research about different ways that adults approach learning. In this seminal research study, university students were asked to do a task that's very familiar to them. They were asked to read an academic article. In this case, it was about education systems and their reform. And they were asked some questions about the content. The researchers then asked the students to reflect on how they had gone about the task of reading the article, and they got a really wide range of responses. Some admitted that they had just tried to memorize chunks of the text that they thought might be important, while others had really focused on telling the story of the article, trying to get a grasp of the main arguments that the author was making, to make sense of it for themselves and to relate it to things that they already knew. As you might imagine, the impact was clear. The people who had worked to make their own meaning from the text remembered it better immediately afterwards, but they also did much better when they were tested again on it 6 weeks later. Those who had tried to rote learn bits without really understanding the context of the piece overall struggled, and sometimes they even completely misinterpreted what the author had meant. Following that research, many more studies in later years backed up the pattern that the researchers saw, and these approaches to learning became known as deep and surface. Surface learning tends to focus on breaking material down into small chunks, but these can often be quite disconnected. The learner tries to memorize, but maybe in a disorganized way, not seeing the whole picture. We know that surface learning is more likely to happen when a learner is motivated just to get a qualification done and finished and to move on from it, when they don't really see the personal relevance, or when they're scared of failing. Deep learning, on the other hand, comes with a focus on the big picture. The learner really wants to understand the material, to make it meaningful for themselves, and to understand how the arguments and concepts apply to them. So they're really motivated to develop competence in what it is that they are learning. It's a really important bit, though. Surface and deep approaches to learning are not stable traits that are fixed in people. You are not a surface or a deep learner, although some people might lean more towards one approach than the other, depending on their previous educational experience. What we know is that two factors play a big part in how a student learns. One is the context that they're learning in. So, for example, research shows that when teachers are really focused on transmitting knowledge, rather than facilitating learners' understanding, the learners are more likely to report taking a surface approach. The other thing that's really important is the learner's own perception of their learning environment and context. So, for example, where they feel that their learning workload is inappropriate or excessive, they're more likely to adopt a surface approach, or where they don't really see the relevance to them of the learning material. Interestingly, what they understand about the assessment and the aims of any assessment in a learning situation also impacts whether they adopt deeper surface learning approaches. And there's been some interesting research to show that really well-designed learning courses centered around problem-based learning that should be perfect for inspiring a deep approach can actually fail if the learners believe that the assessment at the end is still only going to be focused on straightforward factual recall and doesn't require integration of knowledge. So what does this look like in the language learning context for Cambridge English? Well, at Cambridge English, our approach to learning and assessing English language skills is based on the learner developing competence in communication and interaction. We think that knowing vocabulary and verbs and grammar structures is important as the building blocks of language, but it's not enough. Language use is action-oriented and it has a purpose in the real world. We want our learners, from the very beginning of their learning journey with us, to be practicing the types of things that they will use language for in real life. We focus on all the skills of reading, listening, writing and speaking, and we're always trying to find innovative ways to do this authentically that integrates those skills in a way that reflects how learners will do it in real life. Our learning materials, curricula and assessments are all designed with this in mind. So, for example, LinguaSkill is an online assessment that is designed to ensure employees have the communicative skills they need to perform effectively in the workplace. So making meaning is important. What else do we know about setting learners up for success? Well, one really important thing is that encouraging learners to practice retrieving material from memory is really key to boosting learning. A lot of adults rely on ways of studying or learning that are quite passive, like rereading texts or underlining little bits of it. And this is a problem because it makes us think that we're learning because we become increasingly familiar with the text, but we're not really working to make any meaning when we do this. And it's not giving any feedback on where the gaps in the learner's understanding are. Research shows that embedding just a single quiz or test in a learning module can boost scores on an end of course assessment. And there are a couple of things you can do to make it even better. We know that when retrieving information from memory is effortful, it helps to embed the learning more. So if you can delay a quiz for just a little while to allow some time for forgetting, it's more effective. Using straightforward questions to get your learners to recall facts is useful, again, as the building blocks of what they need to know. But think about where you can add questions that require the learner to make inferences, to really try and understand the bigger picture and the context. It doesn't have to be the teacher or the learning facilitator who develops a quiz or a challenge either. Learners can do this for themselves or for each other. And think back again to this idea of making meaning. In order to be able to write a quality quiz question, learners have to be able to make sense of the material for themselves. So there's the double benefit of making meaning and practicing the retrieval. And games and challenges can be a really good way to do this. At Cambridge English, we know that using well-designed games for language learning can really help to engage learners. They reduce any stress or anxiety in learning situations, which can increase motivation for the learners. And we know that it can help them to achieve a state of flow, which is that point when you're really absorbed in what you're doing and enjoying it. And that can all spark more positive attitudes to learning. In the workplace, these kinds of collaborative games let colleagues have fun interacting in more informal ways, which is probably really important when people are working remotely these days. And so it can help to support the development of working relationships too. So we've talked about the importance of making meaning and practicing retrieving information, maybe using quizzes and challenges. The next thing to think about is finding the right level of challenge when you are testing your learners. We know that when quizzes and tasks in assessment are too easy, learners quite enjoy them because they get a nice feeling of success from it, but it doesn't support further learning. On the other hand, if a quiz or a task is far too difficult, it makes learners feel stressed and frustrated, perhaps leads to fear of failure. And all of those emotions are more likely then to spark surface approaches to material and in the way that learners are trying to approach their learning. Getting the pitch right takes practice. It's about really knowing your learners. But when a task is within a learner's grasp, challenging them maybe to think about a problem before they see the solution, encouraging them to reason and answer before being told, it really helps to encode and embed the material. And a little bit of challenge helps it to stick better. And wrong answers are fine. They still support learning as long as the feedback that learners get is constructive and supportive and they don't feel undermined. So hopefully by now with what you've heard, you might be thinking how your organisation might use Kahoots to support learning, keeping some of these principles in mind. And there are lots of different ways that you can use them. Kahoots can be used to practice or review material that you've already taught, maybe at the end of a unit or for learners in their own independent study. But you can use them in any stage of a sequence of learning. So you might use them as a warm-up to capture attention or to refocus learners at a certain point when you need to bring them together again. They can be used to create a positive learning atmosphere and to relax your learners a little bit, or to provide support and stretch to learners who are ready for it. You can even use them to prompt reflection at just the right time. So as I mentioned before, you can get your learners creating their own Kahoot challenges, which hopefully encourages the sort of deeper conceptual understanding of the topic material that promotes effective learning. Kahoots work as a task in face-to-face learning and training, but more than ever probably at the moment in the current situation with COVID-19 where working remotely, they can be integrated into both online and offline learning to help keep your learners engaged, to get them working together, or maybe just to provide those just-in-time prompts of a sort that a trainer might do automatically in a traditional classroom. So in this short talk, I hope I've provided some insight into adults' varied approaches to learning and how you can help set them up for success. And using just some of these very simple principles, you can either help to develop learning materials and games and quizzes that could have a real impact for your learners, or perhaps they will help you to evaluate resources that are already out there to decide if they're right for you. Thank you for joining me for the talk.